Everyone knows the story of the Titanic, a massive ship, an iceberg, and a disaster, right? But what if I told you that story wasn't entirely true? What if the ship that sank wasn't the Titanic at all? It sounds unbelievable, but this idea just comes from something called the Titanic swap theory. This theory claims that the RMS Titanic was secretly switched with its sister ship, the RMS Olympic. Both ships were owned by the White Star Line and looked almost identical. According to the theory, the Olympic had already been damaged in an earlier accident and was too expensive to repair. So instead of fixing it, the company supposedly swapped the ships, sent the damaged one out as the Titanic, and planned for it to sink so they could collect insurance money. It's a bold claim, and honestly, it sounds more like a movie plot than real history. But before jumping into conclusions, it's important to take a step back and actually examine the facts. The real Titanic sinking happened in April 1912, when the ship struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean. Over 1,500 people lost their lives that day. This wasn't just a mystery or a theory, it's a real tragedy that affected real people and families. So any claims about it should be taken seriously and evaluated carefully. To figure out whether the swap theory makes sense, we can use three analytical tools. The first tool is looking for inconsistencies. In simple terms, this means checking if the details of a claim actually match up, or if there are any contradictions. Supporters to the theory often point to small details, like differences in windows, deck layouts, or other designs. They argue that these differences prove the ships were switched. But if you look closer, those claims start to fall apart. Many of those differences are either based on misunderstanding, poor quality images, or incorrect assumptions. Some features changed during construction, while others are just misidentified. According to K. Spalding, when you compare the evidence carefully, these supposed inconsistencies don't actually support the theory, they contradict it. Even more importantly, the wreck of the ship found at the bottom of the ocean matches what we know about the Titanic's design, not the Olympics. So instead of proving the theory, the evidence actually weakens it. The second tool is avoiding indiscriminate acceptance. This basically means not believing something just because it sounds interesting, dramatic, or widely shared. The Titanic swap theory spreads easily, especially online, because it challenges what people think they know. It creates a sense of mystery and makes people feel like they've discovered a hidden truth. As D. Grossman explains, that's exactly why conspiracy theories like this gain attention. They're exciting, unexpected. But just because something is popular doesn't mean it's accurate. A lot of the claims behind this theory come from weak sources, speculations, or selective use of information. They often ignore the evidence that doesn't support the theory. This is why it is so important to question what you see and hear, especially online. The third tool is documentation analysis. This means looking at a real, reliable evidence, like official records, ship's blueprints, construction documents, and historical reports. When historians and experts examine these sources, they all point to the same conclusion. There is no credible evidence that the ships were actually switched. As Mike Hall explains, the sinking of the Titanic was not part of an insurance scam. It was a real historical event caused by a collision with an iceberg. The documentation consistently supports the version of events. Even K. Spalding, who discusses the theory in detail, ultimately explains why it doesn't stand up to careful investigation. So, when you combine all three tools, looking for inconsistencies, avoiding indiscriminate acceptance, and analyzing real documentation, the conclusion becomes pretty clear. The Titanic swap theory is interesting and is definitely captures people's attention, but it doesn't hold up when you actually examine the evidence. And honestly, this is a good reminder of something important. Just because the theory sounds dramatic, surprising, or even convincing, it doesn't mean it's true. That's why critical thinking matters, because it helps us separate what's believable from what's actually supported by evidence.